Hi, my name is Jenny Thielen, and I decided to make a video for the assignment of student motivation. Part 1, you said, point blank, what is your job to be done? When I thought about that question, my first reaction was, well, what's my job to be done? Of what do I do when I first meet somebody and they ask me that question, like, what is your job? That's a pretty basic question that people ask, what do you do? And so I would say, my job is a second grade teacher. My job is to teach second graders to become successful learners, but that's a pretty general definition there. I didn't say much about what do I actually do. And looking at the rest of your questions, I think that's, when I would get more in detail, like when you ask, how can I help them be successful? Well, then that goes back into what does my job entail? What do I do? So for that answer, I would say that to help them be successful, I'm always managing my classroom. I'm implementing school procedures. That way they know the expectations, what are the rules, we're always practicing going over things. I'm planning lessons always. That's really important that I plan out and I know what I'm teaching and I have everything ready to go for my students. I'm assigning activities. And then not only am I planning the lessons and the students are doing them, but I have to evaluate their students' work. It's not going to do me any good to do these activities when I'm not monitoring my students and seeing what's working and what's not. So I need to go over these activities and provide feedback to students to decide whether that lesson is working well or if I need to go back and change something, or if these students need accommodations and modifications, what can I add to help them be successful? Do they need to be in a small group? Will that help them? Like, just always looking at what I'm doing and evaluating if it's working or not, and then just finding different ways to help them. I think it's important to model good behavior for my students so that they know what's expected of them. What I will always expect is to be consistent with our behavior, and I want them to be respectful of each other and of me, and just, modeling that. I think it's very important. I think it's important for me to also model communication skills. That way my students know how to communicate with me in a respectful way, and they know how to communicate with their peers. That's always something that's really important. So I think communication goes right into your other question of how do I optimize my relationships? What do I do to make those relationships better? And I think communication is key. Getting to know my students is very important, that I have a relationship with them and they know that they can trust me and that I'm here for them, and that ultimately my job is to help them, not hurt them. I'm there to be their mentor, to be that guide for them that's going to provide whatever tools necessary for them to be successful. Not only by, optimizing those relationships, that's going to help with communication and connections, is ultimately going to go into the joy of learning. If I have connections with students, then most of the time they're going to be a lot happier at school. If I get to know my students and I figure out what they're into or what they like to do at home and bring that into school somehow, or just getting to know my students where they know I care and I care about them, and I am aware of the things that they might need that's going to help them be successful, that's going to spark joy. When they know that they're coming to school and I'm happy and I'm in a positive mood and I create that positive environment, then that's going to make them have joy and want to be at school and not have them hate it every day and be like, ugh, we gotta go back to school, like we have to see Mrs. Thielen again. You're like, that's not going to spark joy. So just trying to make them excited to want to learn and finding hands-on activities that are going to make them more excited, and engaging activities. And I think another way that I spark joy is by allowing students to work with each other, by letting them work in groups or partners. That always makes my students happier than when they just have to do things on their own. That way they have another person to bounce ideas off of, and then they can, form relationships amongst each other, and it just builds for a more positive environment within the classroom. I also spark joy by giving them credit for what they're doing, by giving them, a recognition for their achievement, and just constantly letting them know that they're either, they're doing a great job, or that I'm here for them, and just letting them know that they're not in it alone. I think is important for students to know that, I'm here for them. I'm going to do the best I can to help them be successful, and that they can always come to me with things that they need help on. With regards to your question about are there some things that need to happen before learning experiences can fully happen or whatever, and yeah, of course, you have to always know your students. You have to know what accommodations might need to be in place in order for those students to be successful. Are there modifications or things that need to happen. And then it's not even just jumping into that. First, it's like you really have to take an in-depth look of a student's life and the difficult things that might be happening to determine what's going wrong. Looking at their data, seeing what's making them struggle or what isn't quite going so well, and then finding those interventions and put them into place that's really going to help students with their learning experiences. Because if you don't understand why your student's struggling, or you're not really digging deep to understand what's going on with them, then they're not going to have the best learning experience, because they're going to still have those gaps that you didn't fill, and it's gonna be a harder and harder time for them to bridge those gaps. So just really getting to know your students and figuring out what they need best. With part 2, you talk about how can I be a better mentor to students, or what does a mentor look like to me. And being a mentor, is really important that you are there for your children, that you're not just a mentor for one student, that you are forming these connections with every one of the kids in your classroom, that you're there to provide them with support, that you are always going to help find the best things that's going to make them successful. And if something's not working, you switch it up. I think that's the most important thing with being a mentor too, is that you know your children and you understand, maybe this one activity worked really great for Joe, so Joe's going to do this activity online, but it's not really working very well for Sally, so Sally's going to do something different. But they can differentiate, or we can find things that are going to work for each children. I think that's important as a mentor, to know your students and continue to be there for them, not just have them start to do something and you don't check back in, you just you're there but not really there. No, being a mentor is that you are there and you are consistently trying to make sure that they're doing well, and you're always asking them questions, not even just at the school part of it. I think being a mentor too is that they can talk to you about things that maybe they had a bad night at home and they want to just talk to you for a few minutes just to feel a little bit better, or maybe mom and dad are fighting or something, and they just need your support for a little bit, and know that when they come to school, you're there for them and you're going to always be there for them, and you're not going to just leave them high and dry. That you might be working with one student, but you're always going to come back and you're going to check on them too. That they feel welcome. That's, I think, really important with being a mentor, and just showing them the ways, modeling the correct behavior, modeling the things to do, is also being a mentor, being that person that they look up to, that they know okay, my teacher is showing me what I'm supposed to be doing, and she's showing me these expectations, and I'm going to continue doing those things because I look up to her and she's helping me become a better learner. I think that's very important. Part of that being a mentor is finding things that are going to motivate them. It's that coming back to the whole communication and making those relationships with your students. If you are planning assignments and you just know that your students are not connecting with it and they're not liking it, and there's a lot of them are just not really into it, it's then you need to look back on yourself of what's a different way to motivate these kids to do these assignments, or a different way to get them engaged, and then go in that direction. Always trying to find things that are going to help them and not hurt them, in a way of just helping them become happier in their learning, I think is really important. With blended learning, I think ways to be a good mentor to your students is what I had kind of said before, if something's not quite working for them on the computer, if something's too hard for one child, being a good mentor for them is knowing your students, that, okay, it's not working. So they might be doing the same skill. Let's say they're doing math and they're adding and subtracting numbers or whatever. Maybe one set of students is they're doing really well, they're successful in it, so they can continue doing 2 or 3 digits. Great, so I got to know those students, I know they can do that. But maybe now, as another mentor to other students, I'm noticing that they can't do 2 and 3 digit numbers, and they need to just stick with adding and subtracting 1 digit. So then just finding those activities online that they are doing too, where they still get to do math and they're still doing the adding and subtracting part, but it's just on different skills. So that way it's benefiting them, that way I know them and I know that it's not going to be helpful to put them on something that they're struggling with. I think that's important to continue being that mentor. And I think another thing with being a mentor is just that you provide recognition for them. You're giving them feedback of, you know what, you're doing a really great job, and you're constantly recognizing that they're trying hard or they're working and you are rewarding them for things, whatever that reward might be, whether it's just a verbal reward or you are telling them, hey, now you got some dojo points, or you can get in the prize box, or whatever kind of reward it is. I feel like that's important as a mentor too, of just that you are letting them know that you care and you're there for them. Like that's ultimately, I think, one of the big things about being a mentor is that you are there and you're consistent and you don't just help them one day but you're not really quite there the next or whatever, that you are making those relationships and you are getting to know your students, to make those connections with them. That's ultimately going to help them with their learning. So, yeah, I think that's important. Make those connections with your students.